Hey everyone, and welcome back to Whole Soul School and Foundation's Fireside Chats for December 2020. My name is Marie Mohler, and I'm an author, intuitive, and a co-founder of Whole Soul School and Foundation. And I'm here with my co-host and co-founder, Lacy Frazer, who is a clinical psychologist by training and a practicing life coach and consciousness educator today. So I first want to welcome everyone to our Fireside Chats this month and to remind our listeners that our mission is to empower people worldwide to engage the journey of personal transformation, as well as to raise awareness and funds in order to provide tangible goods and resources to men and women releasing from prison. Additionally, now and in 2021, you will see us expand our mission of empowering people through whole soul literacy, which essentially means beginning to offer some courses, interviews, and conversations that empower people to embrace learning the new language of wholeness, empowerment, oneness, integration, inspiration, freedom, creativity, and more. And we will continue to share more about this in some new interviews we have planned and new podcasts to come. So I want everybody to stay tuned for that. And of course, I also want to share that we are continuing to offer our fireside chats and weekly inspirational messages on social media platforms in the weeks to come. And one more noteworthy mention before we get going today, Lacy, is that we are expanding the platforms where we post our videos, the poems from Flower Diamond, and our inspirational messages. We are emerging more and more on some new platforms and with a presence there on minds.com, rumble.com, gab.com, and brand newtube.com, and I still am working to get us into parlor.com. And many people know that we're also here on YouTube, we're on our website at wholesoulschoolandfoundation.org, and we're on Facebook and Twitter. We have a presence on Instagram, but I'm just not there as often. So I just, when people are looking for us, a lot of people don't know about these new platforms. And I think it's important to seed that in people's consciousness because we want these messages to, seed and grow far and wide. So without further ado, I just want to say one last thing that we, of course, hold a core belief that the conversation, the insights, and the connections that we share is and are the education that we offer here. We are a school and foundation. And so we are providing a foundation for people in the teachings and the messages we share. We also raise funds to support some larger projects that have philanthropic missions in supporting people whose lives have been impacted by incarceration. So without further ado, Lacy, welcome.
Welcome. It's awesome to be here. So incredibly hard to believe it is December 2020.
It is.
The eve of a brand new year. And I know many people are not going to be too sad to see 2020 move on. But I'm really looking forward to 2021, and all the blessings that will come in this new year.
Yeah.
So
I know that we are seeding a lot of what we're going to be talking about in 2021 here in this conversation today. And, one of the ways that we want to inspire people as we do cross that threshold into 2021 is these tools of personal empowerment. And we're going to be talking about the 12 universal laws so that we see that some of that consciousness into our awareness, right? And so I'm wondering if you want to lead us into an exploration and set a foundation for this.
We've touched on so much over the last couple of years at Whole Soul School and Foundation. And I think it's fair to say that so much of what you and I talk about, Marie, kind of are these larger operating principles, if you will. These are principles that govern the universe. And really, you and I discovered many of these principles and laws going through our own transformation over the last 16 years. But I wanted to do sort of a formal podcast this month that really talks about specific 12 specific universal laws. And I thought we could touch on each of them briefly today. And then we could actually use each law as a launching pad, one law per month over the next 12 months.
Yes.
So really, what are universal laws? Universal laws to me are these sort of overall intrinsic, unchanging laws of the universe that truly have been around forever and that have been known by ancient cultures since the dawn of time. I did a little bit of research before we started talking, and a lot of these universal laws are linked back to ancient Egypt and ancient Greece, and are also present in most all sacred texts. And that's pretty impressive and expansive and sounds really important. Yet at the same time, it baffles me that we can go from elementary school to middle school, high school, and college,
right,
and never be taught these universal principles. So I firmly believe that these universal principles should be taught in all levels of our education system. So, but in any case, for now, you and I have the opportunity through Whole Soul School and Foundation to teach other people through our offerings, and this is something that I think will set the stage for the next year and beyond.
Well, and to bring them back to the forefront of people's conscious awareness. It's like anything. I'm sure there are many things, if you do some research, there are many things that just kind of fell away in humanity's consciousness as we've been evolving over time. And I can say, as I have raised 3 children, is that one of the best examples that I can think of in an educational context is we just saw like cursive writing
disappear.
Just disappeared. They just decided as part of the curriculum that it wasn't going to be something that we seeded in future generations. And if you wanted that, you had to seek that outside of what the mainstream conversation is now today. But when you and I were growing up, it was very much a part of our grade school experience. And today, that's not the case for most children. So it's the same thing. It's like whatever this was, just little by little, they just must have stopped talking about the universal laws and these universal principles. And yet what I would also say we're talking about is 2 human beings bringing this back into the consciousness of the conversations we have in our fireside chats. But the universal, there's a divine design that functions through these universal principles. So even if humanity forgets about these principles, universal laws don't go anywhere. They're still operating. People have just lost the language about connecting with these universal principles. And that's a lot of what we're here to do, is seed this language back in people's lives and in their awareness and how they're interacting with the energy inside themselves and around themselves. And when people eliminate a language, just like Latin is like an obsolete language. It's still taught, but it's not spoken. It's informed all other languages, I think, right?
Pretty much.
Because when you look up root words, they all have roots back in
origins,
Latin, right?
Yep.
And yet it's not something that anybody that I know speaks fluently. But if we're going to come back to this, and we're coming back into a higher consciousness of wholeness and cooperation in our society, we are coming back into a unity consciousness. That's probably a podcast for another day. But we're weaving things back together because we've been so separated for so long. And language is an ally in that process. It's a bridge. And if you lose the language for something, it seems to disappear from the consciousness of global humanity. Yeah. And yet then there are times when we bring these things back. And I brought cursive handwriting back into my children's experience, right, when they were growing up. I don't know how much they've retained of that, but I did seed it in their conscious awareness that there is such a thing as cursive writing, because otherwise it's just not in the conversation in most schools today. And the same thing, we're seeding this back into our awareness so that it can come back to life in our daily experiences. And life gets a whole lot richer on the hero's journey when you have the tools and the allies working with you.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said.
Yeah.
And as you were talking, I was sort of feeling these laws as these definitely are laws and principles that guide or potentially guide well, they do guide our life, but many of us have become unaware of it because it has dropped away from our consciousness. But much like sort of building a house, you build a foundation, and then you build the framing of the house, right? And then you fill it in with walls and windows and things like that. These universal laws are sort of the foundation and the framing of our life.
Right.
And if we actually allowed ourselves to learn them and practice them and experience them and recognize them, gosh, how expansive and rich life really becomes, and how empowered we would feel, how much more empowered we would feel walking through life as we embrace these. So I'm really excited about talking about these, because this, I know for you and I, has really helped shift our life path in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So let's start with the first universal law is called the law of divine oneness. So we've talked a lot about this. It definitely is in our language overall whenever we speak, right? But the law of oneness is really what it sounds like. It highlights sort of the interconnectedness of all things, right? It says that beyond our senses, every thought, action, and event is in some way connected to anything and everything else. Okay? So I love how you have such a way with words and with energy, but perhaps you could help us sort of understand how this sort of shows up in real life, and we can talk about how we can apply and work with this law.
Yeah. Well, what first comes to my awareness when you just described that, the interconnectedness of all things, the law of divine oneness, it is something that is felt to be known. And our culture has, really in especially the last number of decades, we've gotten more and more and more separated, and we've gone down a path of deeper and deeper separation. But there is still this law of divine oneness is still there. It never goes away. These universal principles have been here since the beginning of time, and they will be here far after probably humanity's even here on this planet. It's the fabric of the universe that weaves us together, that we are oneness on this planet as a living, breathing, collective, sentient species. And that's the other word that came to mind when I just wanted to share is sentience. It's feeling each other to know each other. It's feeling our interconnectedness. And when we're so distracted and when we're caught up in getting tangled into more and more separation, it gets harder and harder to perceive that something like oneness or the law of divine oneness, that these things could even exist. But an experience like COVID, for example, while that might have created some stress in people's lives in a number of different ways, it's also brought a greater focus into our lives of how we're interconnected, right? This pandemic is showing us in some ways that what affects one person could affect all of us. It also has brought a clearer focus on family and the way we move in our lives and how we are connected to other things or disconnected from other things. So it's just interesting to me that this energy of oneness, that many people who are already have been on this path of the hero's journey or the journey of personal transformation, when we find that certain things in our lives are not meeting the needs we might have, whether it's financial decisions or medical decisions or, educational, whatever decisions we're facing, and we go seeking beyond the box that we've been given, there's a divine oneness that connects everyone and everything. And just like a couple pinky toes outside of that box, you'll begin to start to understand that there is this law of divine oneness. There is this interconnectedness in everyone and everything. And I love that there's a law that defines that and helps us understand that's a guiding principle in all of our lives. And if everybody had that orientation in their day, right? When we're starting a work day or whatever we're going to engage in our daily lives. Each day we wake up and we're going to have a number of experiences that day. But if we could orient ourselves that we are part of a greater oneness, and what's our part to play? How are we going to participate in the interconnectedness of all things? We might just make different decisions than we often do when we are living outside of that awareness.
Oh.
So the oneness, even if we don't know about it, it's not that the oneness goes away. It's just we're living outside the vibrational awareness that we are all one. And I think this law of divine oneness is just, of course, it's the first law that is highlighted.
It's really I think about people who may not be as in tune with this language. And if we were to even kind of talk about this in a more like concrete kind of way,
sure,
we quantum physics tells us that everything is energy, that there's energy. We talk about that a lot at Whole Soul School and Foundation. So there's energy coursing through all of us. We live in a unified field of energy, like the fish in the ocean, who's the water's running through its gills. If it's not in the ocean, it's not alive. So it's where does the water end and the fish begin? There's sort of a sense of oneness there, and I think we are the same. And so this notion of divine oneness is that there is a divine energy. Some people call it God or source or universe that is coursing through all of us, and therefore we are all woven together, like you said, in this sort of unified field.
Well, and it's also like, is there a drop in the ocean or an ocean in a drop?
Right.
Which is another way of saying some of what you're saying. But
yeah.
Yes, I mean, when you get down, we can talk about it from a scientific perspective, and you can get into the quantum physics of it, but you can also, more and more we're going to be invited to feel it. And that's it. Feelings may be difficult for some people, but they're also how we're wired.
Yeah.
And when we allow ourselves to feel more and more, this is the universal laws are based on the sentience.
Yes.
And this feeling things to know them.
Yes. And perhaps when we get into talking about just this one law, we can really give some great examples.
Correct.
We can come up with questions to ask and where it shows up. So I would say at this point, applying the law sort of in daily life really entails being compassionate with other people, right? Understanding that we are all part of the same, and asking questions to ourselves like, how can I show up and be compassionate and accepting and understand and seek to understand what I don't understand, So anyway, thank you for that.
Yeah. Or even what would love do?
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
That's a big question.
So the second law of the universe that we're going to cover is something that I know you are quite an expert at, called the law of vibration. So, at a microscopic level, everything is in constant motion, vibrating in a specific frequency. Again, if we got into quantum physics, we could really understand what vibration truly means. The law says that our vibrational frequency can inform our lived experience, right? So, for example, you might be able to receive money, but perhaps you can't hold on to it because vibrationally you could be operating on a kind of a lower level, a lower frequency.
Right.
So I would love you to just share a bit with our listeners about vibration. You are, in fact, your website is called Frequency Writer.
Right.
You are a channel of higher frequency.
Right.
And so I definitely would call you an expert on this one.
Well, an expert just means that I have enough lived experience that I know it and I understand it and I know the language of it. And so frequency and vibration and energy are all living in the realms, that we can say is the unseen. And yet the unseen is what is creating our lives way more than the seen is.
Well, the unseen is creating the seen.
It is. It actually is. And so, you might receive money in the example that you gave, right? Which is tangible. We can all see coins or dollar bills or whatever form of currency we use, right? That's a physical manifestation of wealth in our world. But wealth and money or monergy, right?
Right.
Money and energy married together as monergy, that's a vibration. And if you have a vibration that doesn't trust money, or as a frequency, as a vibration, or have never had enough of it, right? If there's some kind of lack and scarcity in your vibrational field, even though you can't see it, the dollar will come to you. You'll have that physical dollar, but before you know it, the wind will come, a gust of wind, and blow that dollar out of your hands because of frequency, because you're not a frequency that can receive and sustain that.
Well, and that's about thought and belief, right?
There's many things that affect our vibrations, but just the law of vibration is that everything is in constant motion and vibrating at a specific frequency. And there's so many aspects to each of these laws, which is why we could spend a month, a podcast per one, and some people might make it a life career to explore these things. But I think just bringing him to people's conscious awareness that in the realms of the unseen, in the realm of energy, in the realm of vibration and frequency, and there are people with better language than I have. I've heard people explain the differences between those two words, sometimes for the simplicity for me. I sometimes use them interchangeably, and then sometimes I might actually make a distinction of frequency, versus vibration versus energy. But this is an energetic fabric. It's like part of the universal matrix. It's part of creation that's listening to us, and that everything is in constant motion. We live in a creation, and we're summoned and invited in everything we say, feel, and do to be a creator. And so when you realize that, when there is an actual law of vibration, this is the invisible matter, if there is such a thing, but it's the invisible energy that in fact is creating everything that everyone experiences on an individual level and on a global or collective level. So it's very powerful for this to come back, because if we just stay on the side of science and we eliminate this connection and we step out of what was the first law, the law of divine oneness, if we step out of the law of divine oneness and we just want to debate about vibration from a scientific perspective, we're going to miss that vibration is all part of the oneness of all things. And we are vibrational beings. And we can't isolate all these things. They're all communicating all the time.
Yeah.
And that means we're communicating with the field of oneness. We're communicating with vibrationally with all of these things, and everything is in motion all the time. It's like a friend of mine who talks a lot about water. It's like water can be conceived of as matter, but if you try and grab it with your hands, good luck. Right? Good luck holding that water in your hands. Right. And vibration is the same way. It's always moving. You're not going to capture vibration in a glass per se. It's something that's moving, and it's connected with everything all the time. It's like the energy of love. That's a vibration. There's a love vibration. You can see it in its form. You can see it expressing. You can see love expressed. But I think, at least to this point, I haven't seen anybody bottle that vibration of love per se, right?
Right.
And this is just allowing this in our consciousness, where we don't have to fully understand every concept we're going to talk about.
Right.
We just have to allow the possibility that this is informing who we are all the time. Yeah, it's manifesting our lives.
Yes, absolutely. And all the other laws, we'll talk about this for sure. But, just even taking the first law of oneness, which is the interconnectedness of all things through this sort of divine unseen energy.
Right.
And the second one, law of vibration, that energy that we speak of that connects all things is vibrating at a certain frequency.
Right, and it's in constant motion.
And it's in constant motion. So just those two things will marry all the other laws, I'm sure, as we go through this.
Right, there's a wisdom.
Yeah,
there's a wisdom to these.
So the third law of the universe is the law of correspondence. And this law states that patterns repeat throughout the universe. And on a personal level, our own reality is a mirror of what's happening inside us at any given moment. So kind of like, you hear things, I don't know, I believe this is even in the Bible, but again, all of these are throughout the ancient texts. As above, so below, right? We hear as within, so without, okay? So this is the notion that there's sort of a communication and a correspondence between our minds, our hearts, and the energies in which we live. The law of correspondence. So in any troubling situation, we have to ask what is the situation showing me about me, right? Because everything that I'm experiencing inside of myself is also outside of myself.
Right.
Right? And that's powerful. We have a lot, again, all of these, once we can embrace them, can really seed increased empowerment within the self. And I think this is one of those, that I'm responsible for my reality. And I have to know that what I've got going on inside of me vibrationally is going to help create things outside of me. So if I want good and connectedness and love and happy relationships and plenty of money or whatever it is that I'm wanting, I have to be a vibrational match inside of myself.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes sense.
Yeah.
I was thinking, just the description that we have of the law of correspondence states that patterns repeat throughout the universe, and on a personal level, right? Our reality is a mirror. I think one of the greatest illustrators of this is the Masaru Emoto experiments with water, where he was able to show how people's vibrations, even without speaking them, just their vibrations, or if they did write a word on a piece of paper. We've talked about this experiment before, and we will talk about it likely again. But Masaru Emoto was a Japanese scientist, who was studying frozen waters on a slide, and he could show that there were crystal patterns that formed based on words.
Well, and how the water was treated,
in its environment.
Right, the impact of the energy of the words as they were spoken, or the music as it was played.
And it reflected a pattern in the crystals that formed in the water that he saw under and he actually, that's in his book. You can see what the words were, what the vibrations were, right? There's a law of vibration that were captured on the slides of the crystals that formed in the water. And this is something that science is going to catch up with the spirituality, with the quantum physics, with the fabric of the universe that we've lived in for a long time. But it's like humanity, because we've been so separated and we've forgotten some of these sacred texts that knew about all these universal principles, that had all this wisdom, thousands of years ago. And we've kind of lost touch with that. We're having to have it come back in our awareness. And Masaru Emoto was one of those people who was able to take the unseen and make it seen and show the patterns to us. Heart Math is another place where they have instruments, and they're showing how our vibration shows up in measurable data. Right? And we can talk about a lot of these things as universal laws, but then we're starting to have equipment or the ability to demonstrate these things. And I think this law of correspondence is showing us that we are very powerful creators. We live in an interconnected universe. This is an energetic universe, and there are patterns that energy manifests into our lives and into our experiences.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Well said. Okay, moving on to law number 4, which is probably one of the most talked about universal laws, and certainly in our mainstream society, and that is the law of attraction. And this universal law basically states that like attracts like, right? That we get what we focus on. This is the law that speaks about creative manifestation, that what we think about, we bring about. So again, if we are weaving, we see all the interconnectedness of all these laws, right? Everything is energy in the oneness. The energy itself is vibrating in a certain frequency. That energy is communicating
and creating patterns of experience.
Creating patterns of experience. And so now we're also talking about the fact that what we are putting out vibrationally is pulling back into our experience that which is like itself, which is very, very powerful.
Right. And there's a big difference between unconsciously creating and consciously creating, right? So we are, subject to the law of attraction. It's part of this living universe, right? But for people who don't know that, things seem more random. There are no patterns. They're not aware of the patterns, and they're not aware that like attracts like, according to the law of attraction, that is a universal principle that is listening all the time to our frequency. So when you do begin to wake up to that, you can become this conscious creator, and you can begin to summon into your experience what you most desire. And that means you have to become the vibration that you desire, right? You have to, energetically rise in and become a match to that which you most seek.
Yes, and I think that is a big misunderstanding, actually, about the law of attraction, that people don't realize that you have to become the energetic vibration of what it is you seek.
Right.
So many people, especially through whether it was the movie The Secret or What the Bleep Do We Know, they illustrate, you can sort of visualize what you want
and it just comes to you.
Attract it to you, or magnetically attract it to you. And then when it doesn't happen, people say, well, why doesn't it work? Right? And the truth is that because you haven't gotten your vibration aligned with the belief that it can come to you, or with the desire that you have for it.
It's not an empty command to the universe, because if you command and you say, I want $1 million, but you don't do any work to be a match to $1 million, right? Say you have childhood wounds or, things from lifetimes ago even that would push away receiving that amount of money or that amount of abundance or that experience of abundance, then you can say, I want $1 million all you want, but the universe isn't listening just to your words. It's listening to your vibration. And if your vibration is, I don't have $1 million, and you're saying, I want $1 million, your biggest accent mark is on, I don't have it. I don't have $1 million. And the universe is like, yeah, she doesn't have it. She doesn't have any of that money. And she won't have any of that money because that's the vibration.
Right.
So in the law of attraction, a lot of people saw that movie, The Secret, and there have been other movies that are talking about, and some people think the law of attraction is like the only universal principle because it's the one, and that just came back into our consciousness though. I don't remember when The Secret came out, but
2006.
2006. And that's when it hit the mainstream, and this law of attraction and the sacred texts started hitting people's consciousness again. But then people might have heard that, like you said, and said, oh, okay, well then I'm just going to ask for the Lamborghini or the new house or whatever, but not realizing, because I'm not sure that film fully expressed the vibrational work it requires to get into alignment with something that's not in your experience that you want to have in your experience. You're the gap. It's not the house or the job or the partner or whatever that you're asking for and giving the command to the universe. It's listening. But beyond the words, it's saying, so where are you vibrationally right now? Because that's what we're going to bring to you. And if you don't become the vibrational match to what you are desiring, if you don't take the journey to become the vibrational attracts like energy, then all you're going to be doing is letting the universe, what the universe is hearing is, I don't have it. And the universe is like, but we're giving you what you're asking for. What you're asking vibrationally is to not have it.
Right.
And the universe is hearing that.
Yeah.
So it's a journey. This law of attraction, all of these universal principles, just because they're coming back into our consciousness and just because they're inside the fabric of the living energy of our creation and our universe, doesn't mean that we're experts in knowing how to make this work.
Exactly.
Right? We have to relearn it. We have to remember how this goes. And, it's not in everybody's conscious awareness, but in my personal experience, I believe we've lived lifetime after lifetime. And so I've had lifetimes where I knew this, and I've had lifetimes where I forgot these principles. And I'm in a lifetime where I remembered, I forgot, I remembered again, and then I put in the dedication and I engaged the commitment and I allowed myself to understand more of what this is. And life is a whole lot more fun when you play with these principles and you start living this way.
Yes.
When it's just something that you feel owed, and say, well, if there's this law, then I'm going to have whatever I want. But you haven't learned anything.
Right.
Because if you just think just because we've laid this out in a 60-minute podcast that you're going to get everything you want because Lacy and Marie said so, or even that you hear that the universe said so, well, it does say so, but this is something I share on my podcast through Frequency Writer and the platforms I share my messages, is that admission is by vibration.
Yes.
So if you are not the vibration of what you are trying to gain entrance to in terms of a life experience, it's not happening. It just won't come. And in fact, you're going to manifest whatever it is that you are vibrating the loudest. That's what the universe does. It's listening to your energy field. And that's why it becomes more and more important to become more and more pristine in your energy field. These are things that, you learn this on the hero's journey and in this journey of personal transformation. And
I think it's fair to say too that you and I have really, we have a deep desire, and this is what we're doing at Whole Soul School and Foundation, is to help guide and teach people these principles and how to live life a very different way.
Right. And it's helpful to hear from people. The word expert I'm not a big fan, because expert has a lot of connotations and associations, and people make assumptions when they hear certain words. I would just say I've been a student in the journey of personal transformation, and I have some insights that I can pass along to other people. That's how we're supporting each other to wake up. And so that's what we're doing, is sharing this with people. And I just know from my own experience how these laws show up. And I've played around a lot with the law of attraction, because that might be one of the first ones when I created my very first vision board, that I thought, if I can send commands out to the universe, I can have anything what I want or want to be or whatever. And those vision boards taught me a lot, because when things weren't coming or the way that I wanted them, that's when these principles become the journey. They're the map, but you're the traveler, right? So all these can do is guide us.
Right.
But if you don't decode it and commit to it and play with it and engage with it and learn from it, then they're just words on a page. And you're going to be frustrated. Many people who saw The Secret, I'm not saying everyone, but I'm sure some people saw that movie and say, this stuff doesn't work, right? Just another failed bit of useless information. But that's not true. The law of attraction didn't stop working. It's still working. It has been timelessly in the works. It's part of the divine design. But you have to learn how to decode them, or gain admission by vibration. You have to portal in energetically to begin to bring these concepts to life, so that it's your living language. It's your living literacy. It's your living experience. And then you become a teacher to others, because you've learned how to live inside that world too. And it's very frustrating when you're somebody on the outside of that world, right? It's usually when people summon in some kind of awareness like this. And I would think that would be why some of our listeners listen to our podcast, because we're sharing from that place, that realm of known experience. We've lived it, and we're just sharing as travelers in the journey, as students of these lessons, with others who can benefit from that. But the law of attraction's a good one, and it's a fun one, because you can practice. I want a cup of coffee. Well, if you're not the vibrational match to coffee, it's not coming. And you could just play with that, and you could test it out. One of my friends, and I won't go on a long story, but one of my friends who podcasts with me for Whole Soul Mastery talks about when she learned about the universal principles, she put every single one of them to test. And unless they could prove themselves to her, she wasn't sharing this with her students. She needed to experience it first.
Absolutely.
And I think this is what happens. But for someone listening saying, well, I don't want to be a teacher of it, I just want the benefits of it, or I want to experience this, that means you have to get in the game. You have to step into the journey and say, okay, I'm willing to travel. And I understand that this is my map, but I'm the one who has to decode some of this stuff. And I'm the one who has to let go of some things that are blocking me vibrationally, or just not aligned with what I'm saying. And it can be the greatest teacher. What in me is not a vibrational match in every way to what it is that I'm saying I most desire? Oh, it is such a good teacher. Vibration is the best teacher there is.
Yeah.
Because there is no admission until you achieve the vibration.
Right.
Period.
Right. I love that.
Period. Yeah.
All right. Thank you for that. So universal law number 5 is the law of inspired action. So closely related to the law of attraction, the law of inspired action is all about taking, real actionable steps to invite what we want into our lives, right? So often it's inspiration that comes from within, that intuition, that gentle nudge. It's not always a plan of action like we're so used to in our world
It's not
and what we're
setting
taught.
goals and working hard to get there. It's different.
Exactly. Practicing this law is all about we have to slow down and we have to get quiet and we have to create space for that internal guidance to sort of show up and reveal itself.
Right.
When we let go of our need to arrange and control how things will work out and are open to possibilities, it makes room for new ways of achieving our goals that we might not have considered otherwise.
Right. And this isn't the law of ego action. It's the law of inspired action. And when you're inspired, you're listening from a whole different place inside you. And that's the oneness, the interconnectedness, the vibrations, the law of correspondence and this law of attraction and all these laws that commingle and cohabitate our everyday space. And we do have to learn, because our world can be so distracting, and we've had all these messages in our families of origin and in school and all the education that we've had. Sometimes it's a matter of letting go some of that education. Sometimes we have to let go of things that we were taught. You just can't have those things, or, right, you just can't do these things, Nemo, or, right, money doesn't grow on trees. We've heard many of these messages. You have to work hard to succeed.
Well,
all these things are different. It's different than the law of inspired action and all these other laws we're talking about. It's a different kind of listening.
It is. I'm so reminded of Wayne Dyer here with the word inspired, because he used to say, inspired really means in spirit. And when we are tapping into our intuitive system, we're tapping into our spirit within. We're tapping into the divine energy that is coursing through us. We are seeking, the guidance from, whether we call it our higher self or our soul self or our soul or our spirit. This is about intuition. So inspired action is the intuitive nudges. It's the inner guidance. And in order to tap into our inner guidance, we have to learn to get quiet. We have to listen. And I'm telling you, in today's society, we are, boy, when you see kids growing up these days and the level of distraction, it's off the charts.
Space,
so you've got
right?
to learn how to cultivate that.
Right.
You have to be purposeful about that.
Right. It has to be valued and prioritized in your life. And unless somebody taps you on the shoulder, or there's something you really desire that you just don't understand why you can't gain access to that, that's when we usually stop and start asking the questions. Why can't I do this? Why can't I get into this school that I want to get into? Why can't I manifest the partner that I want? Sometimes there's an external thing that gets our attention, and then we're willing to go through this process. But we have to make room for it.
Right. And I think, I also think that on the one hand, we've got such a culture of distraction, and on the other, we have had the growth of things like yoga and Tai Chi and meditation, which are all things that help us get quiet within. So there is hope.
It is returning.
Yeah,
it is returning. You can
returning.
see the consciousness swinging back in the direction of all that we've done before isn't quite working. Right. So maybe I need to get back to what's real.
Exactly. The ancient wisdom.
Right.
Okay, so on to law number 6 is the law of perpetual transmutation of energy. So this law states that on an energetic level, everything in the universe is constantly evolving or fluctuating. So every action is preceded by a thought, with thoughts themselves having the power to eventually manifest in our physical reality. So what I like to say about that is that, thoughts have energy. And I teach that, and I've devised classes around this whole notion that a word has energy.
Right.
Right? And a thought is simply words strung together.
Right.
So
And a thought is just made up of a vibration.
Exactly.
Right.
It's all frequency. It's all vibration.
Right.
So we have to really pay attention to what we're thinking. What we think about, we bring about. As within, so without, right?
Right.
It's all connected.
Right.
Higher frequencies transmute lower ones when applied with intention. So knowing this, we can actively, seek to uplift negative energy around us simply with our thoughts and our actions.
I mean, have you ever woken up and, just in the morning, you just woke up, they say, on the wrong side of the bed?
Yes, exactly.
But you don't have to have a on the wrong side of the bed kind of day the whole day. People don't realize that. You can change it. You don't have to wait to go to sleep to hope that somehow magical sleep, you're going to wake up on the right side of the bed the next day, right? No, you can just say, oh, look where I woke up today. Observe that, notice it, and then here comes in appreciation and gratitude. But that's one of the easiest ways. It's a tool that we have to shift the energy. So just appreciating the sun, or appreciating a beautiful day, or appreciating if it's raining, right? The beauty of how rain gives life to things. It's the simple things of appreciation that shift you from the wrong side of the bed to the right side of life, right?
And that's an example of a higher frequency transmuting a lower frequency, right?
And it's a law.
Right.
That the opportunity is there to transmute the energy.
Right.
Not everybody takes it. Sometimes people just go with it and just become that ball of negativity. And by the end of that day, if nothing's turned around, you can just imagine that person and their energy field, right? And when, there's this message of like, have you ever been around a negative person and felt your own energy, your own positive energy depleting? That's also that we can often sense that somebody isn't quite right or isn't really themselves today, or, right?
Right.
These are all things, and a lot of what we're talking about is having an awareness, making room to have awareness,
right?
Making room to observe that. And now maybe after a podcast like this or seeing The Secret, a lot of us have seen many, many workshops or read books about concepts like this, but you're not doomed to be in a bad mood all day. But you do have to make the choice to notice that you are an energetic being having an energetic experience, and you might have to choose a different energetic focus.
I like to say choose a better feeling thought.
Choose a better feeling thought.
Right. And it can shift your energetic vibration on a dime.
Right. And when they get to witness this in their lives, we're not a victim of our experience anymore. And we are more empowered.
Right.
And this is what we're all about here at Whole Soul School and Foundation, is empowering people.
That's right.
Go ahead.
That's right. Okay,
Yeah.
So I'm just aware of our time. And so law number 7 is the law of cause and effect. So, relatively straightforward. This law highlights the direct relationship between actions and events. So what's important to note here, Marie, is we often can't see the effects right away of our actions, but they come back around, right? Mm-hmm. So what you put out there may not come back to you in that moment, but that vibration, that energy that you put out there has a ripple effect. Mm-hmm. So if you're coming from a place of anger or resentment or some other negative emotional state, and you put that energy out there, eventually you're gonna feel the effect of that. You're gonna get a result.
It's the boomerang effect.
Yes.
And it's also the law of karma. It's one of the ways that we understand karma, right? It's the law of cause and effect. And we might have done something in another lifetime that took a long, long time that's affecting us now. And so when we can understand, and I don't think they've said it yet in these 12 universal laws, but energy cannot be destroyed. It can only be transmuted. So that's how we ultimately teach ourselves, is that we can, sometimes we're even wrestling a pattern that we keep manifesting, and we're wrestling a former creation of ourselves in that pattern. Mm. And that's when we realize, I'm the only one that can transmute this, that can clear this out. And that's how ultimately, I think that's what, to me, the boomerang effect, or the law of karma, or the law of karma, cause and effect, we are the students of our very own creations. Right?
Absolutely.
We're the learners in our very own school, and we're the teacher and the student and everything in between. And when we realize that we're learning from ourselves in all the ways we react and we respond and we create and we participate in life's experiences, then we begin to say, oh, and if I have a pattern of creating these boomerangs, I want to learn, how do I create them? What is the mechanism inside me? When do I trigger? Why do I trigger? And we start paying more attention. These are things to explore when we look at this one law. But this is another one that shows up in our life that we can say, it's just like anything. If I have one bad boss, but then I have a second bad boss.
Right, exactly.
But then I have 10 bad bosses, and all these bosses were terrible. The common denominator is you.
Right.
And it's your patterning.
Right.
And that's when
your vibration.
And your vibration.
Right.
And there's a message for you in all of that. And so just figuring that out, but understanding there is a law of cause and effect, and how you're thinking about and feeling about and patterning about is manifesting these experiences. And when you can think or feel a better feeling thought, you're beginning to transmute the negative karma, the negative pattern of cause and effects. And you're beginning to plant seeds of a lot more blessings in your life. But it does take shifting into that consciousness that you're a conscious participant in your life and not just a victim or somebody who's subjected to whatever the gods are trying to do to you. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's really, you start to realize you're the center of your own creations.
Yes. And that kind of takes us also into the next law, which is the law of compensation. The law of compensation relates closely to all these other laws, right?
Right.
And it really talks about that you reap what you sow, and that's really the main takeaway, with the law stating that your efforts will always come back to you positively, right? So if you're seeking something, you must contribute in some way towards your goal.
Right.
Right. So you've got to move. In order to move towards something in a positive way, you've got to give to it, and it will come back. So to work with this law in a manner that attracts or compensates for love and support, you might ask yourself, where am I being called to serve and support others today? Right? Just as an example.
Right. Exactly. You reap what you sow. It's just such a great energetic capture there. And that, what you feel about and think about is what you bring about. You do reap what you sow, and it is a great teacher. And we could be frustrated with it, we can push against it, we can resist it, we can ignore it, we can do all these things, but it's still going to be teaching you in some way, shape, or form. Yeah, those two seem to go hand in hand, the law of cause and effect, and the law of compensation.
Well, one of the things that just occurred to me as you were saying that was, these laws, and I think I said it probably in the beginning, they are unchanging laws of our universe, right? So there is no real, well, maybe in this situation that law might work or not work, right? These are laws.
Right.
So I don't know if I'm conveying what I'm feeling, but it's like there is no arguing with these things.
You can try and negotiate.
Right,
and
exactly.
I'm sure many people do.
Yes.
Right? And we can demand things.
Yes.
But admission, as I say, admission is by vibration.
Right. And so
it's very simple.
When people say to me, why does this always happen to me? Why do I always get myself in this situation? Why does it, we've got to ask ourselves,
right?
What am I vibrating? What am I putting out?
And am I really done with the pattern? Because when people say, why does this always happen to me? There is a part of them that up until now, perhaps, has gotten something out of those things happening to them. Some people, even though we don't consciously think this, get fed energetically from having challenging experiences until we someday say, you know what? I want some more fun in my life, right? I want a different kind of experience. And that's when we start to really pay attention. But you're right. There's nothing to negotiate with. You either learn to become the vibration of what you desire, or you're not having it.
Right.
And if you are experiencing something you would profess that you don't want, thou doth protest too much. And therefore you are somehow still embodying the very vibration that keeps creating that pattern. And it's tough, because what we're also talking about that I don't necessarily know that I see in these is 100% responsibility for your life. There's many side awarenesses that come along in this journey.
Like in the house building analogy, the 100% responsibility for our life is is the foundation, in my opinion.
We
in
didn't
some
bring
ways.
that in. I mean, obviously, this is not a comprehensive, complete conversation. This is like, it'll take people lifetimes to journey through all of this.
Well, that's why we will devote a month to each one.
Right? And even still, though, I'd still say a month, but there's more lifetimes to learn, a lot more about these things. But just being aware of them, when it shows up, you'd say, oh, that must be the law of cause and effect coming back to me. Oh, that must be. Yeah. And you realize that the universe is communicating with you, whether you want to acknowledge that or not. And these aren't human laws. These are divine laws. These are cosmic laws. Yeah. This is universal law. And religions can come and go, and world populations can come and go.
Political candidates.
Everything, right? Even pandemics can come and go. But the universal principles are still at work.
That's right.
Timelessly. Right?
Yeah, and I'm smiling at our number 9 here is the law of relativity. And to be very honest, I've not thought about, I've spoken and I've taught about this law, but not really knowing it was a law in a sense. But this law suggests, we are inclined to compare things in our world, but in reality, everything is neutral. So in other words, the everything relativism, right, exists in all things, and in the end, meaning comes down to our perspective and our perception, right? And it's all about. I teach a lot about this notion of getting vibrationally neutral, especially in hard times, challenging times. And one way I illustrate kind of this notion is that, everything in our field that we might see in our life, it kind of gets interpreted through our filter of experience. But in and of itself, it's a neutral thing. It has neutral energy, and you can choose based on your perception through your filter how you're going to think about it. So it's kind of like I have a pen in my hand, and I can look at this pen and I can think this pen is gonna create the book that I want to write or tell the story. It's an instrument of change. It's an instrument of creativity, right? That's positive. It's got a positive vibration and a positive meaning. Then I could also look at this pen and say, oh, that's a pen. That's neutral. I've given it no meaning, positive or negative. It's just a pen, right? Then I could also look at this pen and I could see this pen as a weapon. Right. I worked with people in prison, and a man could kill another man with a pen. Right. And if I looked at this pen that way, that's negative. That's a negatively charged interpretation. Right. So it's all about the meaning that we give everything in our life. Right. Right. And which is all relative. And so when we're raised in a society that teaches us to compare and contrast all the time, and that to me doesn't do us a service. I think the answer lies in neutrality and learning how to get ourselves into neutral. One of my clinch sayings when I'm teaching is, if you can't think something positive, get neutral. Right. If you can't think something positive, then get neutral. Just don't go negative. Right. Because of all these other laws that we've been talking about.
Right, and that we're powerful creators. Right. So if we don't have something positive to say, I guess it's then don't say it. And I think that neutrality is a deeply underestimated and undervalued gift.
Deeply.
In our human lives, especially as we wake up to being conscious creators. Yeah. Yeah, neutrality is a really beautiful thing. It's like, I use this example sometimes when we were kids and we were all playing tag, that there was base. And base is where you could catch your breath and you could breathe and you could figure out what your next action step was going to be. And I think neutrality is like getting back to center, getting back to base, where all those negative emotions that want to run their patterns aren't running you. You get a chance to even just be in a place of grace, because that's what neutrality is. It's a place of grace. I would even say many healers I know can feel that in their heart center. They can feel it in their hearts. When they get in this place of compassion and they get in this place of neutrality, we can often see a million other possibilities to the one scenario we're thinking about. But when we don't get in that neutrality and we're snowballing or we're just going downhill with the negative thoughts we're having, and a lot of us know that pattern very well. If you keep going, it doesn't get better. So that's why we do try and find our way back to neutrality. And I think that's really powerful, the law of relativity.
Yeah, I do too. It's become a powerful tool that I teach about that people really appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, law number 10 is the law of polarity. Okay, This is a big one as well. This law says that everything in life has an opposite, right? There's good versus evil, love versus fear, warmth versus cold. But the key about this law is understanding that these are all two sides of the same coin, right? And the way I often illustrate this with other people is this concept of learning through contrast, right? So we learn about what we want in life from what we don't want, right? We learn that, the chair I'm sitting on is soft because I know what hard feels like. If I never knew what hard feels like, I wouldn't know what was soft feels like.
Right.
Right?
No, I mean, everything in life is to help us expand really as a soul, but even as a human being, is that we're growing through all these learning experiences. And if you look at life through this lens, there is no such thing as failure. And of course, the law of polarity, you can get into the negative judgments and those negative emotions about comparing these two things, right? And they talk about that even in the law of relativity. But when we go into neutrality and we're not judging and we're just listening for what we're learning, and we can grow, we do learn from contrast. But even in the law of polarity, if we're not awake to these principles, judgment's coming in.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're going to judge fear because we don't understand that, well, there's gifts to fear.
Right.
Right? And the law of polarity is just stating in a neutral way that everything in life has an opposite.
Right.
Now, we might have all kinds of opinions about what opposites look like and how they feel like, and whether they're good or bad. That's what the human condition will do. But the soul understands these universal principles, and we're trying to get back to this place and look at our world. We won't get into politics, but you can see that polarization of beliefs about politics. That's just an easy one that can get people pretty riled up, especially now. But that's been the case for a long time now. And when we can get into this place of neutrality and we can see what are these contrasts teaching me, and there is, for everything, there's an equal and opposite manifestation or experience that we can learn. And so one way to work with this law is to develop mantras, right? Is that contrast is bringing more clarity.
Right.
I'm learning a great deal from these contrasts without, like you said, if I don't know hard, how can I know soft? I'm so grateful for that reflection and that awareness. If we understand that we're students of this living universe, then we're embracing the ability to be students. Then we're going to be learning. And sometimes we're not learning. Sometimes we, kind of beat our head against the proverbial wall. We just go into the same pattern, into the same pattern with the same energy every time, and we expect a different result. This is how the law of polarity and all of these laws are teaching us that, we have the ability to transmute energy, and we have the power of choice. And when we learn all these things, we can start really valuing, saying, I'm so grateful that I learned that that's such a hard surface, or this is really teaching me this isn't the way to go. In the end, many things in our life that are contrasts that we just don't want, it often is one of our greatest teachers.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's very powerful.
All of these. I mean, I'm glad we're thinking about digging in deeper throughout next year on these, because they really, when you really feel the energy of all of these laws, they're just depth and tons of depth and breadth to it. So law number 11 is the law of rhythm. Cycles are a natural part of the universe, right? That we've got rhythms in our seasons. And, in our own life, we have to remember that integration is just as important as growth. So sometimes we live in a way that we expect ourselves to be one way all the time, whether we're thinking about our health or productivity. But the truth is that's not sustainable, to be one way all the time. And there's some real negatives to living that way. So I think what this law is about is really taking note of our own inner rhythms and working with them instead of fighting them, instead of, resisting them.
Right.
And
that law of relativity and that neutrality can really help us, because if we're not judging our cycles, but we're just witnessing and saying, what is the cycle showing me? Some people have been able to have jobs for 20 or 30 years, same job, same place, same people, for all that time. And some people are just not wired for that. And they like different seasons in their life,
and it's
in
not,
their job or relationships or whatever. You can insert job, relationships.
But I also think a big part of what you're saying is that people will either stay in a job or stay in a relationship because it's what they think they've always done, right? And they're not really open to
a new season, a new cycle.
Exactly. Or to saying, is this really serving me anymore? Is this really what I need? What is this showing me about me?
Well, exactly. And just to continue that example, I would just say that there are some people who, and I'm just going to use the job example, but there could be many, is that they are in a job and maybe it is paying their bills, and maybe it's a well-respected job, and maybe it's in a good location, or it's an easy commute. I mean, there might be many things favorable about it. But if they're getting those inner nudges through that inspiration, right, that's saying, this is closing out. And you might say, what do you mean it's closing out? It's been here for so long. But I think humanity is being called into a new season. We're about to enter the age of Aquarius on the other side of the solstice this week, in fact, tomorrow. And so I'm not somebody who knows a deep amount of astrology and cosmology, but I can say we are closing out at least a couple thousand year smaller cycle within a much larger cycle. Both of those are closing out and wrapping up this particular week in December 2020. And so we're coming to the end of one age and cycle, and we're moving into another age and cycle. And it's going to be characterized by different vibrations and a different consciousness. And many people might be holding on to trying to fit back into the old cycle, the way they thought everything worked and fit together. But we're always being called to move with these rhythms and without attachment. That's where that neutrality keeps coming in. None of these laws would be as effective by itself as it is in combination with the other 100%. Laws.
Well, it's the weaving. It's the weaving that
you need
described.
all of them braiding together, weaving together, so that we can live these fuller, richer lives and have a deeper understanding of why we're really here, what we're really doing, and how it can be more joyful. It's when we judge it, criticize it, constrict, try and say, but this old cycle, I don't want it to close out, and we fight and we resist moving into something new. We can have struggles for that. When something is clearly pushing us out the door and we refuse to leave, we'll feel that too, right?
Absolutely.
And so, this is a very important one, the law of rhythm.
Yeah, I think so too. Especially when we're trying to learn to really move in a flowful way through life with less resistance. So we'll talk more about that.
Yeah, definitely.
So the final law I find to be one that will bear a lot more discussion, so we will just kind of plant the seed here, is the law of gender. And I had not really heard about this as a universal law in the way it's meant here, but I've certainly used the language a lot. So the law of gender has to do with the masculine and feminine energy that exists in all things. Much of our society historically has operated more from a sort of masculine kind of get it done, achieve, checklist kind of mentality, which really doesn't allow, Marie, for a lot of time to just learn how to be.
Right.
So achieving your own balance between masculine and feminine energies can help you live much more authentically. And so I know there's a lot here to unpack, I think, in some ways, because I think people don't understand what it means, what masculine and feminine energy really means.
Right. And we all have both of them.
We do.
As an energy inside us, but we also have to remember we have an X, we have our chromosomes, but we really do. So we have it maybe in our DNA, but we also have it as a consciousness. And a consciousness is a vibration. It's an energy. And I think, again, in our world where we've been so separated and pretty divorced from these principles that are always flowing, right? This is just a timeless energy that it lines the fabric of our experience when we're in physical form here, when we're incarnated, that there are these masculine and feminine energies inside us. And if they're not in balance, you can see how they can either wreak havoc in our lives or, lead us to certain choices that we would make different choices and decisions if we were in greater balance. And this is definitely something to explore. I know that there are many characteristics, and this is just talking about the masculine and feminine energy. And I would even say in the law of polarity, there's masculine and feminine energy. And there's even divine masculine and divine feminine energy, which is just a higher consciousness to these things. And in the examples that you've given, we've gotten very, not divinely masculine, but we've gotten very humanly masculine in the get it done and achievement and very linear goals focused. You go to many coaches and, just in school, it's like, what are the steps you're going to take? Very ego to get this done, right? And the feminine is often ignored, but she's there listening. She's all about flow. She's all about natural rhythms and cycles. She's in tune with these laws of the universe in a different way than the masculine is. And you need both. It's like the heart and the head, right? If we say the masculine is kind of represented in our minds, we could just say that. Yeah. And the heart represents the feminine. You can't, of course, we want our heart leading most things, but you want that flow and that sense of faith and trust, and everything works out and aligns perfectly when the feminine is very connected to the universal laws. And so when we're not connected with the feminine aspects and energies inside us, the masculine runs the show. And it's the one dictating and saying, we're going to go here, we're going to do this, we're going to take these 5 steps, and we're going to achieve this. And that's where failure comes in, because the masculine energy doesn't have any way to accept and work with flow and divine timing and right timing and the perfection of all these universal laws working together with you. It doesn't really have an appreciation for that. So they have to work together. You need the flow and the faith and the trust of the feminine energies and all the aspects that the feminine energy brings. And you need that sort of structural building, architectural design, getting things done. You need those actionable steps. So they have to work together. But when they're out of balance and, the feminine's working without the masculine or the vice versa, we get into more challenging, sticky situations, right? Yeah. And then instead of judging that, we need to learn this law of relativity, or the law of neutrality. And we just allow ourselves compassionately to go inside and listen to the law of inspired action. And we listen for the muse, as my friend Flower Diamond, who writes our poems. She writes her poems from the muse. Listen to that inspired place, because it's inside all of us, but you have to make room for it. So these are powerful. I've seen different things. These are 12 universal laws. I've seen some people focus on 7. I've heard there might be as many as 20. I don't know. Maybe there's more than that, some people would say. But there's a core 12 that keeps coming into consciousness. And when all these work together and we're aware of all of them, our lives are more magical.
Absolutely.
And life is an adventure, and we feel more empowered. And when we don't understand these things, life feels more random. We feel more boxed in. We feel like we have less choices or no choices.
Limited, yeah.
And then it's like where it started with talking about you could manifest money and you could lose it, because you're not working together with all these things. So money comes in and money goes out, right? And you're not able to hold on to it, kind of like water. And I think this is a big part of our journeys here, is uncovering this sacred wisdom and this language and this whole soul literacy. This is another part of templating that through the work we're doing at Whole Soul School and Foundation. And what I'm seeing is more classes being offered where people can, whether it's a live class or whether it's a downloadable course, but to support people in recovering what this is inside themselves in little doses.
Well, that's little what I was going to say was, just listening to these 12 laws and the way we've described them today, they may be very overwhelming for some people, thinking, I understand this or conceptualize all this at one time. And what I would say is it's small doses. It's make it make sense for you.
Right.
Make it feel
right, and choose the pacing that works for you,
Yeah.
because not everybody interacts with things, but with everything, and that's the feminine energy. I'm just going to say it's the feminine energy who kind of flow in and just take it in and absorb it a little bit and experience it. The mind is like, what does this mean? And what do I have to do? Are they telling me I have to do 20 things today? I just have to add all this stuff to my list. No, it's really, that's why we have to have both aspects inside us working together. And so we would invite you to listen just with kind of wholeness ears, the a balanced presence inside yourself, that it's an introduction to some concepts that we didn't grow up with. We didn't learn about, many of us, in our childhoods, and we certainly haven't heard it reinforced by our bosses. I can't remember any environment where any coach, teacher, colleague, anyone was saying, so how does that relate to the law of polarity? Or what do you think about that in the law of gender? I'm just not hearing that in people's everyday conversations.
Right.
But as we go through this new cycle, and we're entering a whole new age, a whole new cycle of consciousness on the planet as we move through the solstice, this is going to become more commonplace. You can see, I remember 10 or 20 years ago, Lacy, going to the bookstore, and there was this little tiny section for spirituality, right? And there might have been 20, 30 books on the shelf. But now you can go, and there's like whole bookstores of these materials.
Right.
And it just shows you, it's like the yoga classes. Maybe there was one yoga class, available 30 minutes away. And now there's probably a yoga class going on all hours of the day.
Right.
It's just showing you, if nobody's really talking about it, that it is coming into our awareness, because these are universal principles returning to us. And this is the time. This is the time to gain this language, to connect with this inside ourselves. So I look forward to continuing this conversation.
Absolutely.
And I look forward to seeing what manifests through us and through other teachers in 2021 and beyond for Whole Soul School and Foundation to start moving into its educational aspects in more and exciting and interesting ways, where people can kind of buffet style pick and choose. I want to listen to that podcast. I want to take that course, to empower themselves to live free.
Right.
Because that's it, right? Empowerment is freedom, and freedom is empowerment.
Yes.
And that's what we're all about. So this wraps up our show for December 2020. And I want to thank you, Lacy, for joining me in this conversation,
Thank
for
you.
seeding these concepts.
Yes.
I want to invite people to continue to find us on the social media platforms where we live. And I mentioned that in the beginning, but just again to say, you'll see in the description section of our videos where you can find us on these alternative platforms, because they're growing too, right? And you can also tune into us via podcast. So if you can't catch the videos of any of our shows and the ones coming, you can tune into all of our shows through our link to Buzzsprout and our platform there.
Spotify,
a lot of your
Apple,
favorite.
iTunes. Yep.
So, you can listen to Whole Soul School and Foundation on the go. And that makes me happy. And until we connect again in January 2021, I just want to invite people, if you are inspired by what we're doing, if you hear the things that we're doing, if you also hear the piece of our philanthropic mission is to support people and empower them through resources and tangible assistance whose lives have been impacted by incarceration, I invite people to consider making a donation, especially at the end of 2020. It's tax deductible. We're a 501c3 nonprofit status. And until we meet again, I want to say Merry Christmas to our listeners. I want to wish anybody who's been celebrating Hanukkah and the Festival of Lights. It's a big month this year, culmination of a very big year of a lot of growth for all of us. And I think it's important to celebrate the light and the faith that we've carried through this year, many of us. And I want to wish anybody who is aware of the solstice a happy solstice and a happy new year, right? New beginnings in 2021.
Amen.
And remember that we're conscious creators and we have the power of conscious choice, and these laws of the universe coming into your awareness now Might just be something that aids you and something that you're going to be going through, experiences you're going to be choosing, and say, oh, wait, they told us about that. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So we're all going to get a deeper experience of living this and connecting into the oneness, which is what you started with.
Yes.
Right? The law of divine oneness.
Yes.
So thank you, everyone, for joining us, and I send you blessings, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.